Welcome to Product Academy Tough Stuff, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get straight to the toughest challenges in product management. I'm Tanya Lau.
And I'm Francesca Cortesi.
In each episode, we tackle one tough question. No fluff, no filler. Just candid insights from seasoned product leaders.
Our guests deliver actionable, real-world answers. Whether you're an experienced product leader or just stepping into the product world, this is your go-to podcast for sharp, tested advice, condensed for your busy schedule.
One tough challenge, practical insights, short and real.
Let's dive in.
So good morning, everyone, if you're listening this during a morning. And today we have one question that have been obsessing me, I would say, in the last months or years, since when I've been working with discovery. And my experience is actually that you are basically in between two different fires in a way. So you have in one way, one team, maybe the management team, the leadership team, whomever, who thinks, why do I have to do discovery? This discovery takes forever. Like this discovery bias that, if we start discovery, you'll never be done. So you have those people that you have to interface with. And then you have your product development team that maybe started with discovery. And, when you start with discovery, probably you want to do more and then a bit more and then a little bit more because there's always more to discover. So how do you know when to stop? So it's like, why should you start and when do you know when to stop are the two things that, that you have to balance. And I have a super expert with me today, Tim Herbig, who is the champion of the champions of discovery, has worked with so many companies and is going to help us navigate those really tough questions. So Tim, tell us, how do we know that we've done enough discovery?
Okay, so the short answer would be, if you know, you know. The long answer is, of course, a little bit more nuanced. I think the way I like to do this is I typically like to, I feel like I have to remind people okay, what's actually the point of discovery? Because I think if you don't have an understanding of that, you can get lost in all sorts of things. To me, it always comes down to that whatever you're doing in discovery, whatever the shape, the format, the activities, the format is, I think it needs to help you reduce uncertainty. That's why we're trying to do this, right? We're trying to reduce uncertainty. If the problem is worth solving, if the solution is worth building, that's kind of the point. And I think teams can sometimes forget that. It's easy to lose sight of that. And I think it's almost like a change sequence people might be going through. Because I think when you might be starting out with discovery, you might start to create your own kind of process. You're like, okay, we do these 5 things and then we're done with discovery. Like we talk to 5 users, or we talk to 1 user every week for 6 weeks, like we've read in the books, or we run one A/B test, whatever pick your point, whatever the technique is. I think there are pros and cons to those approaches. Like the pro is that when you're done, right? You're done when you did the thing, like when you did the 6 steps, the 6 methods, you talk to those 5 people, then you're done. But I think that's something that what I like to call it's very close to alibi progress, which is like you're prioritizing the correctness of the process over the actual value to bring to you. Because just because you talk to 5 people doesn't mean you actually understood the problem. Like you can talk to 100 people every week, and if you sit next to them and all you do is ask them how you like our product, you don't really reduce the uncertainty around your problem. I think that's one part. So you can say if you do those things, then you're done, which is great because you have certainty, but you haven't really gotten the value out of it.
Can I ask one question about that?
Yeah, please do.
Because I think I recognize some of this also if you put into the mix the OKRs. Yeah. Right? Especially when teams start with discovery, and you have leaders or product leaders or even teams that need to have something tangible. Yeah. That is like, okay, now we're doing discovery. It means we talk with 5 customers. Yeah. And then you have that, ticking the box exercise, which obviously could be helpful if you never talk with customers, because it could be a step to get there, right? But as you were saying, you're not really going back to why are you doing discovery? Are you doing discovery to tick in the box, or are you doing discovery to actually validate or unvalidate, if that's a word, a problem? Do you recognize this ticking the box as exercise or process driven?
For sure. And I think this is, I mean, I would say this is even true across probably all disciplines of product management, right? It could be the same for road mapping, for doing strategy, even for delivery. Like just because you hit your story points threshold doesn't mean you delivered value. I think the more specific or the bigger the name of a practice is, the more you can fall for this alibi progress. You mentioned OKRs. It's certainly drawn for that, which is that people just think if I write 2 qualitative statements and put 5 KPIs below it, I've did my OKRs. I've met countless of companies who are way happier when they're done with the OKR process itself, rather than being happy about the value they get from the OKRs. And I think that people then say OKRs don't work for them. I just rather would say that you don't have an environment where OKRs can even work for you, because
Yeah.
most of this is not the result of OKRs. OKRs don't solve something. It's the way you measure your work. It's the way you incentivize work. It's the way you prioritize work. And it's I think a nice symptom is I recently had that when someone said, "Can we just ask ChatGPT to write our OKRs?" And I think that is, I mean, technically, of course, you can, and I'm all for using AI for amplifying your work. And yet, I think what this shows you is the mindset is, how can I take the shortcut to get around this activity? It's like it's not about the writing of the OKRs; it's about the conversation it enables, of like discussing how do you measure success, what even is our priority, and all, like that's the juicy part. Like my favorite moment is when I work with the team on the understanding the metrics, and they were like, the majority of the stuff we're doing does not contribute to any of these key metrics. And like that's the aha moment you want.
Yeah.
And of course, if you
Realization.
ask exactly, and then the format almost doesn't matter. And if you then ask ChatGPT to write your OKRs, it will generate input like some kind of vanilla internet key results, which are technically correct, right? They tick the box, but they don't really help you make progress. You can just submit them, and then management gets off your back. So yeah, I think it's a pattern that can be recognized quite easily across many practices. And again, I think it comes from not understanding the value you want to create, right? If you don't understand the value like OKRs should create for you, I see why you want to get to ticking them off through ChatGPT as quickly as possible. So I'm not blaming individual people. It's this lack of understanding of why are we doing this, and then orienting the way you're using the practice to that value. And I think that's the important piece here.
So that's like going back to discovery. I mean, you could flip the question and say you're not done just because you've done 4 interviews.
Exactly.
Right.
Maybe sometimes you are, right? Maybe sometimes you are. But chances are, depending on
You're
the
not.
channel, the assumption testing, you're not. And I think the other end of the spectrum, though, is that if you once you broke free from this like process-oriented discovery way completion, and then you realize how much more nuanced and non-linear and adaptable discovery practices can be, it can almost be overwhelming again. Because then you're like, I could do all sorts of things. I could do discovery for ages, and I've been certainly guilty of that, of doing way too much discovery for way too long time,
Same
just
here.
because I didn't feel like I'm not convinced yet. And I think Teresa Torres once had this quote: "You're never one insight away from ultimate certainty," or something like that. I might be misquoting here, and I think that's so true. And I love this quote I picked up from Ravi Mehta, who's an ex-CPO at Tinder, and he said, basically, when you do discovery, you try to seek evidence to get to informed conviction. And I really love that as a state, because that's my default answer to how do I know I'm done? And I think when you as a team are convinced enough based on the evidence you have collected, basically when your conviction is informed by that work that you did, that you can stand in to either say, we should do this, we should not do this, we should take another route. And what I love about it, that this is not a score or something. People always love the score. Like, how can they score discovery activities and discovery stuff? Like, it's not a score. It's like, how does it feel for you? Like, when are you in this state? And I think it's also important for companies to realize you can't unify the level of certainty even within a company across teams. Like, it will be different for different teams. If it's an internal platform team who does discovery, a customer-facing team, a B2B team, it will always be different. And I think that needs to be acknowledged. And always, rather than challenge teams on how have you reduced uncertainty? How do you know this is the critical assumption? Like, don't challenge them on how many interviews did you do, but ask them, what did you do? And do you stand in for that? And I think that's the the state you somehow want to get to determine, okay, I've done just enough discovery that I can take a decision.
So what I hear you saying are two things. One thing is that obviously we use discovery to reduce business risk, but it doesn't mean that with discovery we're gonna get to certainty. So that's also a mindset, right? I mean, you're never gonna be able to have a 100% correct, bulletproof. I mean, if we were, we will only have like super successful products, and we know that 70% of products fail. So that's one part, like getting into discovery with the mindset, I cannot answer it to all the question with discovery itself. The other part is to really define what are we discovering. So, if this is an assumption or like it's a problem worth solving, or is a solution that is usable, whatever that is. I think like the shift here is going from how we measure, so measuring in terms of number of interviews, to measuring in terms are we able to answer to this question?
Right.
And I want to put like another thing into the mix, because in my experience, especially at the beginning of doing discovery, you almost have to prove that discovery helps you, right? Mm-hmm. That is not only a process that you do because it's fun or whatever, but it actually helps you get better product into the market. So what happens is that, at least in my experience, really curious if you have the same, is that at the beginning, what I did is like I tried to time box discovery just to avoid that. I mean, because the first time you go in and you try to get all the answer, and I've seen teams that have been discovering for like months, and it's not the teams like, fault per se, but it's also like the steering method. And I think the combination of getting into the assumption definition and having the time boxing could be quite difficult. I mean, you could be maybe get biased by it. So how do you solve it?
I think I love the point that you have of like making sure that, can you remind people of what's actually where's the biggest risk, essentially, the biggest assumption, whatever you want to call it, right? And I think the funny thing what that unlocks in the conversations I have is sometimes teams might not even be aware of how can I do discovery. And like I want to think of these idealized situations and environments, and everything is this neatly organized flow and process. And I remind them, look, the CEO could come by your desk tomorrow, drop a feature idea on your desk, and I bet you there is some kind of uncertainty in there that you can start reducing. And congratulations, you now can do discovery. You don't need to wait for a perfect condition. I think once they understand that, and then they have to, they need to understand this. Let's say they talk about, we do experiments, Tim. And it's like, okay, but what did you learn from the experiment? And then maybe they did 5 user interviews, and then they know, people can use this interface. Like, okay, that's one insight, but is that the most critical for the success of this idea? And then they need to understand that there's a disconnect between what they learned and what they need to learn. And then they need to flip it around. Like, I need to articulate what I need to learn first before I pick the method, and then I can do that. So I think that's the first thing. I'm also a big fan of time boxing. I would say that, and I think the time boxing it requires some good some certain delicacy when communicating it, because I think you can use it a couple of different ways. It needs to accommodate the ambition of the discovery the team has. Right? You shouldn't just say if a team has redesigning the registration page or something, you do like a 6-week discovery. It's like that doesn't feel appropriate. Versus, we want to understand how like Asian buyers use competitor products. Like, okay, that's a different beast, and you maybe need 6 weeks or whatever. So I think that needs to be in place. And I think teams need to understand that it's not about fitting the time box to the methods, but fitting the methods to the time box. So, okay, the time box is the real constraint here. What can we do as much as possible within the time box? And I think former boss of mine gave me a good scenario once. He was like, imagine I'm a VC, I give you money for X weeks. Your whole goal is to prove to me after this time box that it's worth investing more money in you. And I think this is a good mindset to think about. When you have a time box, what's the biggest leverage thing you can focus on to prove to whoever gave you that time box that it's worth continuing to invest in you? And that, I think, just flips the script a bit, as in then you focus on the real essential thing compared to oh, let me start by drawing up this neat tree or establishing that canvas or doing this kind of design thinking workshops. Like, is that the most critical thing you can do? And I think this reminder of the biggest leverage activity to be able to get going or keep going is vital here.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, maybe we're diverging a bit, but I mean, there's so much about discovery, right? That I think what you describe and what I've seen is that sometimes, especially maybe I dare to say with teams that are not experienced yet with discovery, that they want a lot of time to start with discovery. And
Yeah.
it comes like this friction because discovery is not proven and it feels like a process and it feels like something that is unknown. And in that sense, if I go in and ask for, I've seen anything from 4 weeks at the very least to six weeks, 8 weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not gonna get it because I mean, we need 6 weeks to do discovery. I mean, that's what I've heard a lot of times.
Yeah.
And it's a completely different thing if you start with what am I discovering first?
Yeah.
And second, I mean, how can I get more far in what I know now in 2 weeks? I mean, a lot of the teams that I've been working with work in sprint, which is like natural time box of 2 weeks. Why
Right.
don't you start there? And I think that is also like a mindset from like a team perspective, of team leadership perspective, that I mean, you start where you are. I mean, you don't build, a rocket to go to the moon if you don't even can fly a plane. So like start somewhere and try to get it as concrete as possible. I would say it's like the key here to both starting to establish discovery, but also know when you're done. What are your
Exactly.
thoughts on it?
I fully agree with it, and I think the only risk I would point out is that I think there's a risk to sometimes when you take the small steps, I think there is a risk that a team might lose sight of the bigger question that needs to be answered.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's this difference between, okay, how clear is the strategic framing on what actually needs to be done versus I don't want to say opportunistic, but more like, hey, we can take small steps, and you can always take small steps. And I think but by doing a lot of small discovery steps, you might be missing the broader exploration that might be necessary on a larger strategic issue. So I think that's where the framing, and I think that's not so much a discovery issue, it's more of a strategic question, honestly. It's like, how does a team know what to focus on? And I have that a couple of times, like that. I think I make this number up, like let's say 50% of all issues in discovery don't really stem from discovery. Like they're the results of a team not having like a clear understanding of where they should go. Like I once worked with a team who all they had was the goal to increase revenue by the company, of the company. And then like 2 weeks in, they had an opportunity solution tree that was as wide as like Germany. And like, because you have a gazillion things of how to increase revenue, and they were completely lost. And again, discovery won't help you do that. Like talking to more users won't help you answer that. You need like strategic clarity on,
Yep.
hey, company, which path on increasing revenue are you betting on? We need to narrow our focus here. So I think I think the problem is like no framework, no canvas will help you. That's like that's almost a pure. You have to gun through it once, maybe burn your hands once, and then you know that, like you sense this, oh, like this strategic ambition is too vague, I can't work with that, we need to make it more specific. And then you can skip all the framework formalities, and you don't spend time and don't get lost in 6 weeks or whatever, but you're like, okay, now I have the clarity, now we can plan the appropriate measures for that. So I think that's, yeah, like being able to zoom in and out again, which feels very universal to product management, but it certainly also applies to product discovery.
But one thing you said, I mean, if you like back to the question, when do you know I'm done enough discovery? You say that you're there, like you have this task of like increasing company revenues, and then
Yeah.
you start like plotting all the things. And I've also
Yeah.
seen like these trees that became like sequoia trees,
Yeah.
like in
Yeah.
national parks, like they are gigantic. But probably there is also like a signal, right? If this becomes so big, this
Yeah.
probably I've done enough discovery to point at the fact that this is too broad and we
Yeah.
need to narrow down. And I have
Yeah.
like, all the information. I mean, I haven't solved the problem, but I have surfaced a challenge that can
Yeah.
be enough for this discovery. Because in this scenario, what I've seen is the times that we went deeper into discovery, that tree just kept on growing. And I
Yeah.
mean, we didn't really get anything out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
But then the other thing that I think it's interesting, if we go back, like in this specific situation is like, I've done enough discovery. It's time for me, like maybe something really concrete. If you have a tree that gets gigantic, that's probably a sign that you're like missing some context, strategic context, and you can flag that. But let's say we are fortunate enough and we have that strategic context. So our tree is big-ish, but still, you can handle it. But then what we keep coming back to is that you need to know what is your riskiest assumption, what is like the thing that you have to reduce the risk for. And if it's the first time that I do it, what's your, like, how do I formulate that so I know that when I answer to that question, I'm quote unquote done with discovery?
I think I would probably go back to saying, okay, you have to, maybe it's a three-step thing. It's like, okay, can I actually name the riskiest assumption? It sounds so mundane, but for some teams it's not. Like, can you actually literally write it down? Like use David Blunt's assumption mapping or whatever, and just say like, we believe that what X, Y, Z. Like this has to be true about the solution. Okay, so that's the riskiest assumption. Then you should be able to figure out what type of assumption is that. Like, is that something around feasibility, desirability, like all the usual categories? You should be able to map that because that should inform the type of experiment that you're doing or what kind of next activity. And then again, whatever. Let's say it's desirability, and maybe let's say you do a Wizard of Oz MVP, and you get 1,000 people to use the product for a month or whatever. Then you have signal. And then whoever needs to give you the final approval, if someone else needs to do that, we tested this, we believe this is the riskiest assumption to make this product successful. Here's how we tested it. This is the information we get. We interpret this information in a way that this is a positive signal that this product really could work very well. Therefore, we would like to commit to it. And then of course, you want feedback. Like, do people agree, disagree? Do you need to do another round, stronger evidence, more evidence? But I think you need to present this narrative. You need to be able to lay out this narrative. Don't just say, yeah, we did a bunch of experiments. Now we think it's working. It's like, that might not be as convincing. And you don't need to do 50 experiments. But can you just have this clear sentence? Like, for this solution, it's the biggest assumption. We tested it by doing X, Y, Z. And the signal we got from it tells us that we should move forward with it or not. I think you need to be able to lay that out. And I think if you have some kind of tree infrastructure in the back, you can then point that back to the overarching goals and the problem statement. So focus on making a compelling, clear narrative, a coherent narrative. And again, to what you said earlier, we agreed on, there's no definitive certainty anyways, right? So you don't bother trying to do more experiments just to get to an artificial number. You can only work with evidence that you have anyways, or agree together that, okay, we need more. This is not enough to bet $1 million investment of the company on it or whatever.
And I definitely agree with you. I would also like add an extra step, because I have also seen that it sounds easy to define the assumption. Is at the beginning it's not that easy.
Yeah.
But so that could be one. I don't envision. I never think it's a good idea if a PM does it by him or herself. So it should be like a team exercise to start with. And when you have like agreed on what is the thing that you want to de-risk, basically, I would also add the extra step before going, with the experiment, to escalate it to whomever it is. Go to your stakeholder and say, okay, this is the thing we want to validate. Is it big enough? Is it impactful enough? It's gonna give us what we want if we, back to that example, we want to grow revenues. Is this the real thing, to, I don't know, test the willingness of customers to buy another package? I'm just making it up.
Whatever.
Will this give us like what we want for revenues? Because that's another discussion point that will let you know, okay, I'm on the right path. And then I see every step in discovery, you're investing a little bit more of time and money in terms of like capacity, brain power, hours, sweat and tears, and everything we put in there. So you really want to de-risk every step. So I think that could also be a really good opportunity to bring your stakeholders closer to what are you actually doing with discovery.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Getting those again, stakeholder opinions might not be perfect experiment results, but there's some kind of data points, right? And I think instead of dismissing them, you should utilize them and you treat them as lightweight evidence for a certain direction. And again, they probably have some kind of validity for determining if this is the biggest risk or another assumption is the biggest risk.
Exactly. But I mean, if we're rounding up here, if what I've heard, in my initial situation when I was there, stuck in between the people who didn't want to do discovery and the one who wanted to do discovery for life, the most important thing is to define clearly what is the thing that you want to do risk or your assumption. Make it explicit, possibly bounce it with stakeholders and create a narrative and experiments around it to see, that you can answer to the question. Are we able to answer to the question that we do risk this assumption? And really take that as the starting point and don't take the method or the amount of customers interview or whatever the framework you're using it might be as a way of ticking a box and understanding that you're done.
Right,
Anything that I missed?
No, I don't think so. I think the only thing I would add is this fundamental layer that in the company there needs to be the shared understanding of what you mentioned earlier, like why are we doing discovery? Like people need to understand that this is about reducing the uncertainty, and then because then the conversation about why you chose that experiment over another just becomes much more tangible, ideally. And I will always say, I think for some teams, using something like the number of interviews or number of experiments can be a proxy at least, right? It's like it's not an expression, it's not a measurement of uncertainty. And yet, if you've not done any of these, or if you try to test usability by talking to one person, it's like that's a red flag for like maybe you're not on the right track here. These are the only things I would add, but I like the flow of your narrative.
But it's like maybe as usual we try to avoid saying, but it depends. Right? So I mean, it does. If you're like just starting with discovery, probably you want as a team to have like some forcing methods, right? That, I mean, you don't talk to a customer and then decide that this is something you're gonna do. You maybe want to talk to, I don't know, 3 or 4 at least, and see if that's stuck with you. But when you're like over, like, you have created this habit, as Teresa Torres says, like of talking with customers, this continuous discovery, then you can think about what is the risk.
Yeah, I would agree. My favorite anecdote on that is like once in my career, the user research department had the task to upskill the product managers in user research. What they did, they literally launched a competition to say the PM who does the most interviews this month, like gets a prize. And of course, again, quantity does not always equal quality. And yet what this did is like, because interviews is one of those things you only get better at it by literally doing it. So just do 30 interviews in a month and you will be 10 times better at doing interviews, which will be so much more impactful for the rest of the year or your career.
So maybe like we can give like a final advice here. If you're just starting with discovery, you might want to test this competition about who gets the more interviews. If you are, already in that path, maybe I can spin that competition on who writes the best assumption testing. Because that is like also another thing that the more you write and the more you practice, the better you become at. So it's basically, it's creating this habit and connecting the action to the problem you're trying to de-risk.
Yeah.
And then
Or you maybe even do a bit of a competition of like who needs the least amount of experiments to be able to commit to an idea. Something like that with a certain baseline. Because then you flip it. It's like, can you pick the most impactful experiment rather than focusing on the quantity?
That's true. I mean, like, look, 3 competition, you can do them. Can you do them like in 1 year? Exactly. We're just gamified your discovery here. But I mean, if you try, let us know. I would be really curious to see, like, if people try this. If it, I mean, obviously the user interview worked for you.
Yeah, it certainly did. It was like, I don't want to say life changing, but certainly skill changing when it came to interviews. Yeah,
and I mean, that thing is quite easy to do. I mean, it's not complicated. You don't need any permission. You just need like some hours a week.
Exactly.
And you do it.
I think the only thing I would add always, I think you need to have a mini quality baseline for those interviews. So you need to make sure like people have a bit of a cheat sheet or whatever, just so these interviews are not like a waste of time and don't go anywhere.
Yeah, and obviously, if you're in B2B, then you need to coordinate because otherwise you're
That
harassing
would be
your
good.
customers.
Yeah.
But
Who rests our customers the most so they cancel us. That should not be a competition you're running.
that would definitely fly with sales and the CEO, right? Like,
For sure.
totally, no problem.
For sure.
But thank you so much, Tim, for sharing your wisdom with us.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Product Academy Tough Stuff.
We hope today's tough question gave you practical, actionable insights.
If you enjoyed the episode, do us a favor and leave a rating or review. It will help us grow the podcast and make future episodes even better.
Got a question for us? Send an email to toughstuff@productacademy.ch and ask away. We read any submission and might answer yours in a later episode.
Thank you again for listening. We'll see you next time with another tough challenge to tackle.
Until then, take care.